For everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to get into something a little more spicy, shall we say?
A little taboo, perhaps.
A little taboo, yeah. We're going to be looking at swinging.
Oh.
And I have to say, this is one of those topics that, I'm always interested to learn new things, new perspectives.
Right.
But this one, I was like, okay. This is gonna be an interesting one.
Well, and that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It sort of pushes
Yeah.
those boundaries and challenges some of those assumptions we have about relationships.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that really stood out to me in this article we've got,
Yeah.
is it really does kind of turn those assumptions on their head.
It does.
We tend to think, at least I tend to think,
Sure.
that opening up a relationship in this way would actually lead to more jealousy,
Yeah.
more instability. But this article argues the opposite.
Yeah, and it's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? Because you think, well, if you're opening things up and adding in all these other elements, that it's going to create more problems, but actually it kind of forces you to deal with things head on.
Right. And that's kind of what it was getting at, right? It's like you have to have these really intense conversations about boundaries,
Absolutely.
desires.
Yeah, you have to be brutally honest
For sure.
with yourself and with your partner.
Right. And so if you can actually have those conversations successfully,
Yeah.
then arguably your relationship is already in a better place than...
Absolutely. That's where that communication piece comes in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think one of the distinctions that's important to make right from the beginning is that we're talking about swinging specifically.
Okay.
Not polyamory, not open relationship.
Got it.
So it is, as the article points out, very much focused on the physical experience, not necessarily building those deep emotional connections with other people.
So it's really about spicing things up
Exactly.
within that existing committed relationship.
Right.
Not necessarily about finding new love.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so interesting, right? Because we have these assumptions about long-term relationships, like, oh, the spark is going to fade inevitably.
Yeah.
But swinging suggests that maybe it's not about the relationship becoming stale. It's about our approach to pleasure within that relationship.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's a different way to look at it.
Yeah.
For sure. So then what are some of the reasons that couples would actually be drawn to this? Like, what's the allure beyond just wanting to try something new in the bedroom?
Well, the article highlights a couple of key motivations, and they're surprisingly relatable.
Okay.
One of the most common ones is simply enhancing those sexual experiences that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
You've been with somebody for years, routines set in, things become a little less exciting,
Right.
and this offers that opportunity to inject some novelty, to explore maybe some fantasies that are outside the norm of your typical relationship dynamic.
Okay. I can see the appeal there, especially for those who are maybe more sexually adventurous or feel like they've hit a plateau or something.
Right.
But what about the more, deeper relationship needs the emotional intimacy,
Right.
the feeling of being special to your partner? Like, doesn't swinging threaten that in some way?
That's where it gets really complex, and honestly, the article just kind of skims the surface of this.
Yeah.
But the idea is that because swinging requires such intense communication and vulnerability up front,
Okay.
it kind of forces you to build a stronger foundation of trust.
So you're saying by setting these boundaries, negotiating desires,
Right.
and facing that potential jealousy head on,
Yeah.
you actually become closer.
Yeah, instead of just avoiding those conversations.
Right.
Which most couples do in traditional monogamous relationships. Swingers are forced to deal with it.
Yeah, they have to.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be real. Not everyone is a master communicator.
Of course not.
Doesn't this also have the potential to just blow up in their faces?
Absolutely. And that's why the article stresses over and over the importance of boundaries and consent.
Okay.
Like, this is not a free-for-all.
Oh.
You have to establish what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, the types of activities.
Like, are there rules to this game, so to speak?
Absolutely. And it's not just a yes or no to swinging in general. It's what are the specific details of what you're okay with.
Okay, so everyone has to be on the same page.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the elephant in the room here.
Yeah.
Jealousy. How do couples who are supposedly happy and committed actually handle seeing their partner with someone else? Isn't that just a recipe for disaster?
Well, you would think so, right?
Yeah.
But the article suggests that for a lot of couples in the swinging lifestyle, those feelings of jealousy actually become something to work through
Oh, wow.
rather than to avoid.
Interesting.
So it becomes an opportunity to understand your own insecurities,
Oh,
to communicate your needs more clearly to your partner.
so instead of jealousy being this relationship killer, It's almost like a growth opportunity.
In a way, yeah.
Wow.
Of course, it's not always easy. There are definitely couples who struggle with this. But the idea is that by facing those difficult emotions head on with honesty and support from your partner,
Well,
you can come out stronger on the other side.
I have to admit, this whole communication piece is really challenging my assumptions about swinging. I was expecting something a little more superficial, but it sounds like there's a lot of emotional depth involved.
Yeah, there's so much more to it than meets the eye.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those myths then.
Yeah, let's dispel some of those misconceptions.
Let's bust them wide open, because
Yeah.
I think there are a lot
There
surrounding this lifestyle.
are, one of the biggest ones is that swinging means your relationship is already failing.
Right.
But the reality is a lot of couples who choose to explore this are actually in very strong and fulfilling relationships.
Okay.
They're not trying to escape their partner. They're actually trying to explore new dimensions of intimacy and connection together.
So it's not a last-ditch effort to save a dying relationship.
Right.
It's more like an adventurous way to kind of spice things up.
Yeah. Another common misconception is that swinging inevitably leads to infidelity and relationship breakdowns.
Right.
But again, remember that key element is consent.
Got it.
It's about being open and honest with your partner, setting boundaries, making sure everyone's on board.
So it's the opposite of cheating.
Right.
Where there's that secrecy and betrayal.
Exactly.
This is about bringing those desires into the light.
Yes.
And exploring them together.
Transparency is key.
Okay, and then the other one I think that I often hear is that people who swing must be dissatisfied in their relationships.
Right.
Like they're just looking for something they're not getting at home.
Yeah, like they have these deep-seated issues they're trying to avoid.
Exactly.
Yeah. But again, the reality is that many couples who choose this lifestyle are perfectly content
Okay.
with their emotional and sexual connection with their primary partner.
Okay.
They're just curious about exploring this other facet of their sexuality, and they're doing it together.
So it's less about fixing a problem.
Right.
And more about just expanding the boundaries
Yeah.
of what that relationship can be.
Expanding the possibilities.
Okay. All right. So we've debunked some myths. We're starting to understand the why behind swinging.
Right.
But I'm curious about the how.
Okay.
So if someone's listening to this and thinking, all right, this is intriguing,
Yeah.
but how do we even dip our toes into this world? What advice would you give?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to approach it with a sense of curiosity, but also caution.
Okay.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Got it.
And there are steps you can take to make sure you're doing it in a way that feels safe and responsible for both you and your partner.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those steps.
Yeah, let's dive in. I think the first thing is do your research. Don't just jump in based on something you heard from a friend or, saw in a movie.
Right.
There are a ton of resources out there.
Yeah.
Books, websites, therapists who specialize in alternative relationship model. So really take the time to understand the lifestyle, the different approaches, the challenges, and of course, all of those things we talked about, communication boundaries.
So it's about educating yourself.
Yeah.
Not just about the practicalities,
Right.
but also the emotional and psychological aspects.
Absolutely.
Like you wouldn't buy a house without doing your due diligence.
Exactly.
Right.
And part of that due diligence is understanding that there are different ways that people engage in swinging.
Okay.
The article mentions everything from soft swinging, where couples might just flirt with other people or dance, but not go beyond that,
Okay.
all the way to full-on partner swaps, and there's a whole spectrum in between.
So there's room for couples to find their own comfort level.
Absolutely. That's why that open communication with your partner is so crucial.
Right.
What are your fantasies? What are your hard limits?
Right.
What are you comfortable with?
Okay, so let's say a couple has done their research.
Yeah.
They've had the tough conversations, and they're ready to actually
They want to take the plunge.
take the plunge.
Yeah.
Where do they find these people? Right. Where do you actually find other people who are into this?
Well, the article mentions a few different avenues,
Okay.
each with its own pros and cons.
Okay.
There are private parties and swingers clubs,
Okay.
which offer kind of a more structured and controlled environment.
Okay.
Often they have themes or dress codes.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun.
So there's like a social element to it as well.
Absolutely. It's a chance to meet like-minded people,
Okay.
make connections,
Got it.
maybe even form friendships within that community.
And for those who are new to this,
Yeah.
that seems like a good way to maybe ease in.
Yeah, dip your toes in the water.
Observe a little bit.
Right.
Before actively participating.
Exactly.
What about those who prefer a more discreet approach?
Well, that's where the online world comes in.
Okay.
right? You've got websites, apps,
It's like online dating, but for a very specific niche.
pretty much.
Okay.
And a lot of these platforms allow you to be very specific about your preferences and
Yeah.
your boundaries.
So you can find people who are on the same page.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've got those options in person, online.
Right.
But I want to talk about safety because I imagine this comes with its own,
Oh, absolutely.
unique considerations.
Huge considerations.
So what are we talking about here?
Well, first and foremost, just like with any sexual interaction, you got to practice safe sex, get tested regularly,
Okay.
be open and honest with your partner about any health concerns.
So same rules apply,
Yeah.
but maybe even higher stakes because you're involving
Yeah, there are more people involved.
other people.
Right.
Okay, what about the emotional side of things?
Yeah, that's crucial too. We're talking about emotional safety.
Okay.
So, be mindful of those agreements you've made with your partner.
Right.
Respect each other's boundaries, communicate openly.
Right.
If at any point you feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
unsafe, trust your gut.
Get out of there.
Yeah, remove yourself from the situation.
So have like a safety plan
Yeah.
before you even start. Okay, let's talk about the potential benefits then.
Okay.
Because we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the logistics.
Right.
But what are some of the good things that can come out of this?
Well, as we touched on earlier, I think one of the most commonly cited benefits is actually enhanced communication and trust within that primary relationship.
Okay.
To even consider swinging, you have to be incredibly open and vulnerable with your partner.
Right.
You have to have those conversations that a lot of couples just avoid.
You have to rip off the Band-Aid,
Yeah.
so to speak.
And that can really strengthen your bond in a way that you might not get in traditional monogamy.
So facing those tough conversations head on
Yeah.
can actually lead to a deeper level of intimacy.
It can.
Okay. And then, of course, there's potential for increased sexual satisfaction,
Absolutely.
bringing in some novelty excitement,
Right.
maybe even a little playful competition.
Yeah. Spice things up.
Right. Breaking out of those routines.
Right. And especially for couples who've been together for a long time.
That could be really appealing.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's about reigniting that passion, pushing boundaries, experiencing pleasure in new and exciting ways.
Right. And it's not just about the physical sensations either.
Okay.
It's about exploring those fantasies and desires,
Right.
which can lead to a deeper understanding of yourself and each other.
So it's like a journey of sexual self-discovery.
Yeah.
But you've got a partner by your side.
Exactly.
Okay, and it's not just about the physical intimacy.
Right.
It can also strengthen the emotional bond between partners.
It can.
I mean, it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But sharing this experience, navigating the challenges together,
Right.
creating these shared memories, can actually bring couples closer.
It's like you're facing a challenge together
Yeah.
and coming out stronger on the other side.
Okay, but of course, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Of course not.
Right. There's got to be some downsides, too.
Absolutely. And it's important to go into this with a realistic understanding of the potential challenges.
Okay, like what?
Well, jealousy, as we've discussed, is a big one.
Okay.
Even if you intellectually understand the arrangement
Right.
and you've consented to it, seeing your partner with someone else can trigger some really primal emotions.
Right, because our brains aren't always wired for logic
Exactly.
when it comes to love and relationships.
No, they're not.
So open communication, reassurance, a willingness to work through those feelings is super important.
Absolutely. And sometimes you might have to adjust those boundaries
Okay.
or even reconsider if this is the right fit for your relationship.
So it's not just set it and forget it. It requires constant
Ongoing.
communication and adaptation.
Yeah.
Okay, what else beyond jealousy?
Well, there's also the potential for emotional complexity.
Okay.
Even though swinging is typically focused on physical intimacy,
Right.
you can't completely separate emotions from the equation.
Right, because we're human.
Exactly. One partner might develop feelings for someone else.
Right.
Or the dynamics of the primary relationship might shift. So being honest about what you're comfortable with, both physically and emotionally,
Yeah.
setting those boundaries, communicating,
Right.
or maybe even seeking some professional guidance can help.
Are there any other potential downsides?
Well, one that the article touched on is the risk of overstepping boundaries,
Okay.
either intentionally or unintentionally.
Like, give me an example what kind of boundary crossing might happen.
It could be something as seemingly small as telling someone outside the relationship about your swinging experiences without your partner's consent.
Oh.
Or it could be engaging in an activity that your partner's not comfortable with.
Right.
even if it was initially agreed upon.
Okay, so it's not just about setting the rules and then forgetting about them.
Right.
It's about checking in, recalibrating,
It's ongoing.
making sure everyone's still on the same page.
Yes. And then
Uh-oh.
finally, we have to acknowledge that social stigma,
Yeah.
societal attitudes are shifting,
Right.
but there's still a lot of judgment.
For sure.
So couples who choose this lifestyle often face criticism from family, friends.
It's like going against the grain of what's considered normal.
Yeah.
Right.
And that can be really isolating,
Right.
emotionally draining.
So finding a supportive community is crucial.
Absolutely. Whether online or in person, connecting with those like-minded people.
Like finding your tribe.
Exactly.
People who get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so to sum it up,
Yeah.
swinging is this complex, multifaceted lifestyle
It is.
with both potential benefits and challenges.
Right.
It's not a decision to be taken lightly,
Absolutely not.
and it's certainly not for everyone.
No.
But for couples who are willing to put in the work,
Yeah.
communicate openly, and navigate all of this
Right.
with respect and understanding, it can be
It can.
a path to deeper intimacy,
For sure.
sexual exploration, personal growth.
Absolutely.
You know, it's funny. Even though we're talking about a very specific type of relationship dynamic, this whole conversation about swinging really brings up some bigger questions about human nature. You know,
Absolutely.
what are our deepest desires?
Yeah.
What are we willing to risk for pleasure, for connection?
Right.
Where do we draw the lines between what's acceptable and what's taboo?
It challenges us to examine those assumptions that we have
Right.
about relationships and what's normal.
Exactly. And I think, we tend to put relationships in these very black and white categories.
Right. Yeah.
Monogamy versus non-monogamy.
Right.
But the reality is there's this whole spectrum
There is.
of possibilities.
Yeah.
And swinging is just one point on that spectrum.
One point on a very wide spectrum.
Yeah. And just like any relationship model, there are healthy and unhealthy ways to approach it.
Absolutely.
And the key, as we've been saying, is communication, respect, willingness to adapt and evolve.
Always evolve.
Yeah, okay, so for those listening who are maybe thinking, all right, this is interesting, but it all seems a bit theoretical.
Yeah.
How do couples actually navigate this, like practically?
Right.
The article mentions this term compersion, which I'd never heard of before.
It's a great term.
What is that?
So compersion is essentially the opposite of jealousy.
Okay.
It's that feeling of joy or happiness you experience when your partner is enjoying themselves with someone else.
Wait, so instead of feeling threatened or possessive, you're actually happy for your partner.
Yes.
How is that even possible?
It's a mindset shift for sure. And it doesn't come naturally to everyone.
Right.
But for people who embrace the swinging lifestyle, compersion is like a core value.
Okay.
It's about seeing your partner's happiness as an extension of your own.
Wow.
And recognizing that their experiences with others don't diminish the love and connection that you share.
That's pretty profound.
It is.
So, okay, let's say a couple has really embraced this idea of compersion. They've set their boundaries, they're ready to explore. How do they actually find other like-minded people?
Well, we talked about the organized events,
Yeah.
like the private parties, the swingers clubs.
Right.
Those are great options for people who are looking for that more structured environment.
Right.
A lot of times they have themes, dress codes,
Fun.
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun.
So it's not just about hooking up.
No.
It's a social scene.
It's a community.
Okay.
And for couples who are new to this, it's a good way to kind of ease in,
Right. Dip your toes in
observe, see how it all works.
before jumping in.
Exactly.
Okay. And then there's the online world, of course.
Of course, the online world has opened up so many possibilities.
Right. It's like online dating, but with a very specific focus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very specific.
Yeah.
And you can be really detailed about your preferences, your boundaries.
Okay. So you can find those people who are truly on the same page.
Right.
I imagine there are also safety considerations, just like with online dating.
Oh, absolutely. You've got to be careful.
Yeah.
Don't share personal information too quickly.
Right.
Be wary of red flags.
Yeah.
Always meet in a public place the first few times.
Right.
And of course, keep that communication going with your partner
Yeah.
throughout the process.
So take things slow, trust your instincts.
Yes.
Make sure you both feel safe and comfortable.
That's key.
Yeah.
And remember, there's no pressure.
Right.
You don't have to jump into anything you're not ready for.
Right.
You can start by attending social events or online forums just to observe, get a feel for the community.
Find your own pace.
Exactly.
Do what feels right for your relationship.
Right.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive.
It has.
I have to say, it's really challenged some of my assumptions
Good.
about this lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's so much more than meets the eye.
It really is.
It's a fascinating example of how human relationships are constantly evolving
They are.
and how our ideas about love, intimacy, connection are so much more fluid than we think.
Then we realize.
Yeah, there's no one-size-fits-all approach
Nope.
to relationships.
Yeah.
What matters most is finding what works for you and your partner.
As long as it's based on honesty, respect, and consent.
Well said.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring,
Yes.
continue questioning, and continue creating relationships that bring you joy and connection.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep diving deep.